Welcome back to Business English Podcast. You know those kind of tense moments we all face at work? Like disagreeing about a project or a tough negotiation. Well, today we're doing a deep dive into a Business English Podcast episode, all about mastering those speaking skills, so you can handle conflicts like a pro.
It really isn't just about the words you say, it's about how you say them. And this episode, it's packed with practical tips. It's like a toolbox, really, for turning disagreements into something productive.
Right. And get this, the source material says managers spend a crazy amount of time, like 25 to 40% just dealing with conflict. Think of all the projects they could be tackling if they were better at handling these situations.
Absolutely. Poor communication in conflicts can be a huge drain on resources, costing time, money, even talent. But what's fascinating is this episode goes beyond just theory. It actually gives us specific techniques used by successful leaders all over the world. We're talking practical strategies you can use in your next meeting.
Oh, for sure. So today, we're going to unpack this thing called the golden triangle. It's all about voice modulation. Your pace, pitch, and pauses. We're going to learn how to use them to our advantage. Then we'll dig into some powerful phrases, the kind that can diffuse that tension and transform disagreements, turn them into opportunities, to actually collaborate. Are you ready to unlock that inner conflict resolution guru?
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's start with this golden triangle then. You mentioned it's all about how we communicate, not just what we say, right?
Exactly. This episode really emphasizes that in conflict resolution, your voice is your secret weapon. And the golden triangle helps you use it right. So we'll start with pace. Think about, have you ever tried to reason with someone who's talking a mile a minute?
Oh, it's like trying to catch a runaway train. You can barely process what they're even saying, let alone get your own point across.
Exactly. When things are tense, people just speak faster, but that can actually make the conflict worse. The source material gives us a magic number, though. Aim for about 130 words per minute. It's a pace that projects calm and authority, gives the other person space to think about what you're saying.
So slowing down strategically can help us gain control.
Precisely. The episode even tells a story about a CEO. She calmed a whole heated board meeting just by slowing down her speech. It was like she hit a pause button on all the tension, totally changed the dynamic.
Wow, okay, so that's pace.
Yeah.
What about pitch? How can we use that in conflict situations?
The episode highlights this technique. It's from a top mediator in Singapore. It's all about emphasizing certain words to kind of shift the tone. Subtly, like when you say, let's address this together, try putting a little emphasis on address. Then lower your pitch on together.
Interesting. Let's dress this together.
See, it shifts the focus subtly from individual confrontation to problem solving as a group. Like you're inviting everyone to be on the same team, even if they see things differently.
That's a brilliant tweak. It doesn't feel manipulative at all, but it definitely sends a calming message. Okay, so we've covered pace and pitch. What about that final element of the golden triangle? Pauses. I'm really curious how silence can be a tool, in conflict resolution.
This is where it gets interesting. The episode calls it the power pause. It's all about using silence to your advantage. Like instead of rushing through, I understand both perspectives, try pausing for just a second and a half after understand.
I understand. Pause both perspectives.
It does change the feel of it. It sounds less scripted, more genuine.
Exactly. It's like you're giving their words weight, you're acknowledging their feelings. In a heated moment, that pause can make all the difference.
It's a good reminder that sometimes less is more, especially when things are emotional.
Absolutely. So we've talked about using our voice strategically, but what about the words themselves? This episode also talks about powerful phrases, ones that can totally change the tone of a disagreement.
I'm all ears. Tell me about these magic words. They're called the diplomatic dozen, and they're all about framing your language in a certain way to invite collaboration, not confrontation.
Give us an example. What could we say instead of I disagree, which, can come off a bit aggressive?
Instead of I disagree, try I see this from a slightly different angle. It acknowledges their perspective, but it also creates space for you to share yours.
I see this from a slightly different angle? I like it. It's more of a conversation starter, less of a debate.
Exactly. It subtly shifts things from me versus you to us exploring different perspectives together. And that's key to conflict resolution.
So using these diplomatic dozen can help steer things in a better direction. But what about cultural differences? How can we make sure we're communicating well and respectfully, across cultures?
Yeah, that's a really important point. Navigating cultural differences is so key in conflict resolution. What might seem assertive in one culture could be aggressive in another. This episode digs into a concept they call cultural code switching, which is basically adapting your style based on the other person's cultural background.
So it's kind of like speaking a different language. Not literally, but understanding the unspoken rules.
Exactly. For instance, direct eye contact. In some cultures, it means respect, engagement, but in others, confrontational, even disrespectful. The episode talks about a technique called dynamic attention signaling to help bridge the gap.
Dynamic attention signaling, huh? Tell me more about that.
Well, it's about being mindful of eye contact. Instead of holding it constantly, which might make someone uncomfortable, you alternate. Look directly at them, then glance at your notes or a shared document. Shows you're engaged, but not, too intense.
So it's about finding a balance that respects both your style and their cultural norms. Great tip.
This episode is packed with them. We've barely scratched the surface. One of the most surprising things I learned was about the power of silence in resolving conflicts.
Silence?
Yeah.
Really? Seems counterintuitive. Usually when things get heated, we talk more.
I know, right? But the episode argues silence can be incredibly powerful, especially when you use it strategically. It talks about a CEO who used a technique. They call it the power pause progression during a really tense board meeting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me how this power pause progression works.
It's so simple. After each person spoke, the CEO paused for 7 seconds before moving on.
7 seconds. Didn't think that would make much of a difference.
It might seem small, but those 7 seconds were powerful. You see, when we're always talking, we're often not really listening, just waiting for our turn. Silence forces us to stop, listen, and think. Gives the other person space to really express themselves, and it gives us time to process.
Like hitting the reset button on the conversation. Everyone gets to take a breath and re-engage thoughtfully.
Exactly. There are other ways to use silence strategically too, like the reflection pause, giving someone time to think after they speak, the emphasis silence to highlight a key message, and the resolution pause when you're presenting a solution.
Wow, a whole secret language of silence.
And the best part, it works across cultures. Some might be more comfortable with silence than others, sure, but everyone understands the power of a well-timed pause. It creates space to reflect, and often de-escalates things better than words can.
Okay, so we've got these power pauses for strategic moments. But what about when things are already really heated? Tempers flaring. Is there a way to use silence then?
Absolutely. The episode has a whole section on what it calls the Emergency Response Toolkit, specifically for de-escalating conflict fast.
Okay, emergency response toolkit. What kind of tools are we talking about?
One technique is the emergency pattern interrupt. You disrupt the negative momentum by shifting the focus. They give an example of a VP using this to de-escalate a big argument between two senior managers during a product launch meeting, no less.
Oh, I can imagine the tension. How'd she manage to interrupt that pattern?
Well, instead of trying to solve the problem right then, or taking sides, she simply acknowledged everyone's passion and suggested they take a moment to make sure they were channeling that passion productively.
So validating the emotions without getting caught up in the drama?
Exactly. It's like hitting pause on a movie that's about to go off the rails. Everyone can catch their breath, refocus on the big picture.
Brilliant analogy. Okay, so besides this pattern interrupt, what other tools are in this toolkit?
Well, they give us a bunch of power phrases, specifically to de-escalate conflict quickly, like the perspective pause. You could say, this discussion clearly matters to everyone. Let's take a step back and make sure we're addressing the core issues.
Let's take a step back and make sure we're addressing the core issues.
Simple, but effective. Shifts the focus from the heat of the moment to the real problem. Exactly. Redirecting the energy from confrontation to collaboration. Another one is the unity reminder. You might say, we're all working towards the same goal here, even if we see different paths to get there.
Reminding everyone of the shared objective. Easy to forget that in the middle of a disagreement.
Absolutely. These phrases are like verbal first aid for conflict resolution. They can soothe tensions, create space for dialogue, and redirect things toward a more productive outcome.
It's amazing what a few well-chosen words can do.
Really highlights the power of language, doesn't it? But it's not just about memorizing these phrases. It's about understanding the ideas behind them and applying them in a way that feels authentic to you.
So we've talked about our voice, choosing our words, even silence. But how does this all work in groups? in team settings?
Great question. The episode actually has some great insights on that. One technique they highlight is the voice distribution matrix. It's a tool facilitators can use to make sure everyone gets a chance to contribute and that the conversation stays focused.
So instead of just a few loud voices dominating, the facilitator makes sure everyone's heard.
Exactly. They give an example of a project manager. She transformed her team's weekly meetings from chaotic free-for-alls into productive strategy sessions using this technique. Instead of just open comments, she asked specific questions tailored to each person's expertise. Like, Sarah, how would this impact the development timeline? Or, James, what dependencies do you see from the marketing side?
Brilliant. Not only does everyone feel valued and heard, but the discussion actually benefits from all those different perspectives.
And there are other techniques for group settings too, like circular engagement. The facilitator encourages team members to build on each other's ideas, not just present their own.
So it's a more collaborative flow of conversation. Each contribution builds on the last.
Exactly. They even give specific phrases facilitators can use to connect the different ideas, like building on what Maria just said. Alex, how would that affect your team?
So practical and insightful. I can really see these making a difference. I'm already thinking how I can use some of these with my team.
Me too. And the best part is, these aren't just for managers or facilitators. Anyone can use them to communicate better, navigate conflict better, at work or even in their personal lives.
It's about becoming a more mindful communicator, which helps us everywhere. This deep dive is really eye-opening. It's about the nuances of communication and how mastering even small details can change the outcome of a conflict. I'm excited to keep exploring this. What else does this episode cover?
It does. You know, the last part of this episode we're looking at, it really focuses on cultural differences in conflict resolution. We've touched on it, but it's so important.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Even simple phrases can have such different meanings. Depending on the culture, I was reading about how in some cultures, saying that might be difficult can actually be a polite way of disagreeing. But in others, it's a huge roadblock.
It is. It's a great example of why you got to be culturally aware when resolving conflicts. And the Business English podcast episode really digs deep, exploring how different cultures approach disagreement. And they give you practical strategies for navigating those differences.
What are some of the key differences they talk about?
Well, in a lot of Western business cultures, direct communication is really important. You hear things like, I disagree because, or here's the problem. But in a lot of Asian cultures, that kind of directness can be seen as confrontational, even disrespectful.
So how do you express disagreement then in those situations where you got to be effective, but also culturally sensitive?
The episode suggests using more indirect language, focus on collaboration, harmony. Instead of I disagree, you might say, I wonder if we might also consider, or perhaps another perspective could be.
So you get your point across, but without all that tension or putting someone on the defensive.
Exactly. It's not just the words either, it's the nonverbal stuff too. Remember we talked about eye contact, how it can be interpreted differently.
Right. Direct eye contact can be respectful in some cultures, but in others, it's aggressive. Rude, even.
Yeah, and the episode recommends that dynamic attention signaling to handle that. You know, alternating between direct eye contact and looking at your notes, or a shared document.
Finding that balance.
Right.
Makes everyone comfortable.
Exactly. Oh, and they introduce cultural bridge phrases, too. Phrases that tend to work well across cultures, like universal tools, to build understanding, rapport.
I love finding universal tools. Give me some examples. What are these cultural bridge phrases?
Okay, so instead of saying, you're wrong about that, which can be pretty harsh, you could say, let's explore this further together. It invites collaboration, encourages discussion without blaming anyone or making them feel cornered.
I love that. It keeps the conversation open, focused on finding solutions.
Right. The episode really emphasizes that to be a good communicator in diverse environments, you've got to develop your cultural intelligence, be adaptable, respectful of different communication styles, and willing to learn from others.
This deep dive has been incredible. We've learned so much about how powerful our voice is, how important it is to choose our words carefully, the magic of silence, and how important it is to be aware of different cultures. It's like a masterclass in communication.
It really shows how communication is so much more than just words. It's tone, body language, cultural context, and it's a skill you can absolutely learn and get better at with practice.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, take these key takeaways and start using these techniques in your everyday life. Whether it's a disagreement at work, a tough conversation with a friend, or just communicating better in general, these tools can really make a difference.
And remember, conflict is normal. It's gonna happen. It's how you handle it that matters. By getting better at these communication skills, you can change conflict. From something stressful to an opportunity to grow, understand each other better, and build stronger relationships. So true. If you like this deep dive, give us a like, share it, and leave a comment. We love hearing from you. And don't forget to subscribe to Business English Podcast for more great episodes on communication skills and, well, all things business English.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into conflict resolution speaking skills.
Until next time, keep practicing those communication skills. And remember, every conversation is a chance to connect, learn, and grow.